Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. That is for being codependent. Now in your 20s, you're exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in crap relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Codependummy podcast, episode number 23. This is your hostess, mostess, Marissa Escobar, and today I am discussing Codependency and Sacrificial Helping Syndrome, Part 2. Thank you for listening. First, a few announcements. We are celebrating our 4th month here, dear listener. We passed 2,500 unique downloads. So we have filled the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa in Cabazon, California. I literally looked up venues that seat 2,500 people. And that is actually nearby, so I put that. So just picture all of us. It's pretty cool, right? Looking to your left, looking to your right, 2,500 of us, codependummy creators and listeners. Also, you guys might hear my husband working on soundproofing. So anyways, pretty cool, 2,500. And we also have listeners from Australia. What up, Australia? A lot of listeners in Australia, Canada, Indonesia, the Philippines, Japan, India, South Africa, the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, Ireland, Sweden, Finland, and the Dominican Republic, as well as Brazil, Mexico, and Ecuador. And of course, all the listeners in the US across the country. So thank you all. It's been great. And for those of you who are new, I do encourage you to go back and listen to all the episodes in your spare time to hear about different aspects of codependency and all the definitions we have been gathering so far, right? To really understand what it is. Speaking of definitions, today I'm going to use a definition I've come up with on my own the past few weeks. Okay, codependency, according to Marissa Escobar, your hostess mostess of the Codependummy podcast. Codependency is a way of being where one prioritizes fulfilling the needs of others in an unconscious attempt to fulfill their own needs. That is my working definition. I'm curious what you think. Right? I have talked about in prior episodes how a rule I had throughout my 20s was, I will be uncomfortable, so you will be comfortable. And I wasn't doing that consciously, right? I wasn't thinking, oh, okay, let me not draw this boundary. Let me let this man treat me in this way. And maybe I'll get my needs met. No, I sense that I, unconsciously thought, I will be uncomfortable, so you will be comfortable. And then hopefully, eventually, one day, I'll feel comfortable too. Right? It's not conscious. And it's likely from our childhood, past trauma, culture, and experiences that we come to this way of being where in an attempt to get our needs met, we conclude we can only do that by meeting the needs of others. Let me know if that makes sense. And that's where I'm really working towards. This this unconscious desire to get our needs met by fulfilling the needs of others. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, I committed to reflect and share on my own experiences of codependency and sacrificial helping syndrome, as discussed with Katie Vernoy in her episode that aired on May 17th. What I did was re-listened. I took copious notes, reflected on the parts that resonated most with me, and came up with examples to share with y'all about the depths of my codependency at work and how I was a codependummy, being a sacrificial helper to my detriment. I hope that by providing these examples, it will help you see your own codependency at work and also encourage you to do the same with episodes that resonate most with you. In addition to listening, being reflective can help promote the most change. Okay, girl, I know. You're just like, Marissa, I just want to listen. I just want to learn. I just want to listen and learn and be cured, potentially. Maybe not consciously. Maybe that's an unconscious desire that you have. And also, I encourage you. I sense that as codependents, we can obsess, think about, and problem solve for so many other people. And it's time that we take some of that energy and direct it towards ourselves. But it is effort, and you deserve it. And before we get into it, today will be part 2, and I am going to do a part 3. So part 2 is really going to be focused on me providing you with concrete examples of codependency / sacrificial helping syndrome at work. And then part 3, in Katie's episode, she provided us with so many amazing prompts and reflective questions for us to really ask ourselves. One of them being, who am I? Which I know in the depths of my codependency in my young adulthood was a terrifying question to ask. I'm curious if it terrifies you to answer it. And so I'm just slowing down. I wanted to do all of this in one episode, but I'm going to do part 2 today with examples from my own sacrificial helping history of codependency at work in one position. And then we're going to do a part 3 where I really break down Katie's questions. I answer them myself. And I also am hopeful that by me breaking them down and modeling, that you will be enabled to answer them for yourself too. And I'm just going to take a little water break. So if everyone wants to take a sip of tea, sip of whatever beverage is in front of them, take a deep breath. Let's just, because I'm learning about editing and this is all going to be included. So here we go. Chamomile tea. So good. Okay. I want to start by defining some terms that Katie brought up during the episode. I listened to it with my sister. She is not a therapist and she's not a codependummy, but she did not know all the terms. And I realized, Marissa, you need to spell out your terms and some of these definitions for your lovely listeners. So I'm going to define some Katie brought up. Here we go. Compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, burnout, moral injury, gaslighting, and I think that was it. So for you guys to know, right? Compassion fatigue. What is compassion fatigue? Indifference to charitable appeals on behalf of those who are suffering, experienced as a result of the frequency or number of such appeals, right? It's like how many sad dog commercials can we watch until they are no longer effective? It's like, all right, I get it. The dogs are sad. So that's an example, a very cruel example, but it happens, and it happens a lot at work, which I will get into. So Katie mentioned how a consequence of sacrificial helping syndrome can be compassion fatigue, indifference. We're just like, meh, whatever. Vicarious trauma. What is vicarious trauma? The emotional residue of exposure that counselors and other helping professionals have from working with people as they are hearing their trauma stories and become witnesses to their pain, fear, and terror that trauma survivors had endured, right? So sometimes if you listen and empathize and serve victims, right, of trauma so much, you end up taking on some of that yourself. It's emotional residue. It's left over from working with people and hearing their stories. Next, burnout. Right? What is burnout? A state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. It occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet constant demands. That is burnout. Fourth definition, moral injury. Katie mentioned moral injury, and I didn't ask that to you guys. I'm really working on improving as an interviewer and asking questions better. So she mentioned these terms. Since I let them slip by, I had to listen back, and I was like, what is moral injury? So I'm sure Katie has a better definition, but here we go. It is when one feels they have violated their conscience or moral compass when they take part in, witness, or fail to prevent an act that disobeys their own moral values or personal principles. And it's usually due to fatigue, right? So like Katie and I talked about, and I'll talk about, I was a therapist in a very stressful environment. And because I was in this stressful environment and I faced red tape and protocols, I would have to do something that violated my conscience, my moral compass, right? I disobeyed my moral values and personal principles, but the boss said I had to do it. It's like it's a moral injury to me. And last definition, gaslighting. It's a form of psychological abuse where a person or group makes someone question their sanity, perception of reality, or memories. People experiencing gaslighting often feel confused, anxious, and unable to trust themselves. And an example of this is when some of you may say to a partner or a loved one, "You are driving me crazy." And they will respond, "You're driving me crazy. You're the one who is anal about being on time, and you're the one who forgot what time the appointment was, and you are the reason I'm upset." That's what they're indicating. I don't know if they'll actually say that. But really it's, right, it's a psychological abuse where we protest, we assert a feeling or need, and then we are met with a backlash where we are blamed for the situation. You're driving me crazy. Okay, I hope the definitions help. So let's hear about my experiences of codependency and sacrificial helping syndrome. Some background, okay? I graduated from my master's in December of 2015. I was hired at a paying job, which was, there were jobs where I could not have been paid. And so I was looking for a paying job out of graduate school. And I found one near a group home close to where my parents lived, like 3 miles down the street. And I started in June of 2016. So there I was, codependent AF, like I mentioned, with Katie. And this is Katie's definition of codependency. So we'll start with this. Katie said codependency is when you depend on someone else for your self-worth to make you feel better. You can't on your own do those things for yourself. Excuse me. There is a gap that you cannot fill yourself, that you are relying on others to fill. The gap is so big that you constantly feel like you are not enough. And back in 2016, when I started at this job, that was me depending on my coworkers, my clients, and the system filling my gap, right? It was like, tag, this job is my codependent it. I am going to fulfill my self-worth here. On day one, week one, out in the field, that means seeing clients, my sacrificial helping is clear. Okay, and Katie defines sacrificial helping syndrome as my identity is based on how I help other people. And that was my identity. I help other people. I help. My position was initially when I applied, I thought it would be 3 miles down the street, close to my parents. Then I found out that it would be in and around Los Angeles County, which I think everybody nationally and internationally knows. Los Angeles County is not the best place to travel via car quickly. Okay, so I'm going to be driving around Los Angeles County. And then on day one, week one, out in the field, I actually put in an address to my first client, and it was 40 miles east to a different county past the neighboring county. And I remember thinking, what am I doing all the way over here? I complained about it in therapy that week, and I remember my therapist said to me, Marissa, you need to decide very quickly if you're going to work with these kids, because they are in foster care and probation. They need help. You need to decide if you're serious about this job. And I was like, oh my God. I just wanted to complain about the 80 miles I drove on my first day and how bizarre that was. And here she was very clearly saying to me, no, this is a sign. This is a bad sign. Do you want to pay attention to or ignore this sign? And yeah, I just remember God, so much pressure. But what I didn't know at the time, what she didn't know at the time, was deep down, I was a sacrificial helper. And when I talked with my family, likely that day when I got home, I had my first meeting and it was 40 miles away and 40 miles back. I think it was just like, wow. And that was it. And at the time, my father worked nights and had worked nights throughout my childhood. My mother was a school nurse And she drove every day, and I remember specifically there was one day a week where she had to drive and there was always traffic that day. And I sensed that there was a nonverbal, indirect, unspoken message I received, which was, you sacrifice at work to be a good worker, right? Working nights, driving in traffic, working in and with jobs that ask a lot, that is what we do. So I stayed on, and I stayed on for 2.5 years. Like Katie talks about in her episode, she mentioned that those who are sacrificial helpers sacrifice their time, money, and I'm going to add body and relationships, because the role we play professionally as helper. When we do that and don't set boundaries, when we don't take care of ourselves, things can get ugly. I'm going to share 3 anecdotes, 3 aspects, areas of my sacrificial helping at its finest through the lens of how I sacrificed my body, my time, and my relationships. And for you, dear listener, I just want you to think about if these resonate or potentially other ways that you sacrifice, right? It might be through, your mental health. It might be your safety. I want to say resources, which is money. You may sacrifice through family, right? So just trying to pay attention to how we can sacrifice. Okay, one more sip of tea. All right. My sacrificial helping through the lens of my body, how I sacrifice my body. When I started the job, I weighed a little under 120 pounds, thanks to healthy eating and living, right? You guys know that from the depths of my codependency, I'm down about 40 pounds. And at the time, healthy, graduated, doing well. And within the first 3 months of that job, I put on a solid 7-8 pounds and fluctuated with my weight throughout my time there. Since 2 to 3 months in, I started to cope with all the stress of the job that started to look like 70, 80-hour work weeks with food. I binged off and on throughout that entire time, which sucked, right? There I was, standing in the kitchen, feeling like a failure since I could not control how many chips, cookies, ice cream I was eating, while I likely was dealing with how little control I had at work with the hours, so many team members to navigate, so many clients, and all of their families. Thanks to being a sacrificial helper, my healthy eating and living was disrupted. Yes, I did pack a lunch most days the whole time I worked there. I tried to exercise, but it was interrupted. And thanks to all these changes in my diet and exercise, I did not feel as attractive sexually. So that led to less sex with my then boyfriend, then fiance, now husband, right? I'm eating more, weighing more, working out less, so I don't want to have sex with you. I remember even one time, I'd probably been working there for about 6 months. Who knows? Maybe we were doing it once a month, and maybe he was hoping. Maybe that day he was hoping, oh, it's the weekend. Gonna go see my maybe girlfriend or fiance at the time. Get a little something. And I think he came, and I was like, I'm tired. Let's go get something to eat, right? I'm all focused on food. And we got into my car, and he looked at me and said, Marissa, do you want to have sex with me anymore? And I was like, yes. And it's not you, it's me, right? This poor fella. Here he was thinking that I was desiring him less, when it was really me being a little codependummy, sacrificial helper, and identifying so much with being a helper that I completely lost interest in having sex with my potential life partner, right? And honestly, I think that he brought that up, but for the 2.5 years that I was working there, my libido, interest, drive was completely disrupted. My body, this job, being a sacrificial helper in this job, it took a toll. Okay, next example of how I sacrificed my body. After a few weeks of driving up and down and all around Los Angeles and neighboring counties, remember, I drove 40 miles east on my first day in the field. I had a 2001, 2002 Camry, so a 16-year-old car that ran great. And for graduate school, I commuted and I sat in a chair all day, but this was mucho driving. I was in my car a lot. So after a few weeks of driving around, my lower back, my tailbone started to hurt. I remember at first I ignored it, but then it started to burn while I was driving. So I would wiggle. I'm wiggling in my chair for you guys who are listening. I would wiggle left and right, and then I would lean forward and back while I was driving. I looked like a weirdo on the freeway in traffic. That's how I would try to just take some of the pressure off my tailbone. I tried a cushion from Costco, and then I found the best cushion on Amazon, just to really help take the pressure off. I then started to go to the chiropractor. I went to him 3 times a week. Then I went down to 2 times a week, and then 1 time a week for the majority of those 2.5 years there to combat all the lower back pain. I remember early on, I went shopping. I was at Marshall's a long week. I just wanted to de-stress, and I could not shop. My lower back was hurting so bad that I couldn't do it. And I assume I probably went home. My back probably hurt on the drive, and I likely snacked on some Chex Mix to cope and feel better. Right? But look at the blindness, right? Just so unconscious, so not conscious. While I'm being a sacrificial helper, Katie talks about our bodies scream, right? My back was like just like screaming. And I got a pillow. I went to the chiropractor. I started doing stretches. You guys know, talked about that with Haley in the yoga episode. But, right, I was dealing with a symptom of sacrificial helping syndrome, of my codependency. I wasn't addressing the cause, right? The real cause, which was that I was in a job that was asking me to drive too far for too long, too often. It was insane. I was supposed to work at the group home. I was supposed to literally drive 3 miles. I remember I even like fantasized about walking or biking to work. So, right, just paying attention to, as I'm sharing, what comes up for you. How are you treating symptoms, right? And not the cause. How are you treating symptoms of your codependency? How that shows up at work, potentially through sacrificial helping, when you're not really looking at the codependency, the sacrificial helping. So, right, where's our focus? Last example with my body, right? Now there's 3 examples. It was in 2017, maybe early 2018, leading into that. I did lose a little bit of the weight, decent amount. I was having trouble sleeping, and my period was irregular. Like, I think I did too before, or maybe concurrently as I was going to the chiropractor. Since the pain was persisting, I think he sent me to the doctor. Now it's all coming back. Yeah. And I got different scans and analysis of my lower back region and got some blood work done. And my doctor she suspected, oh, you might have a hyperthyroid. And, right, I'm having all these symptoms that also coincide with hyperthyroidism. So she had me go and get a couple more tests. I did not have a hyperthyroid. I was just working at a job that had my body mimicking what it looked like. And part of me, I remember I was like, I hope it's hyperthyroid. But no, it wasn't physical. It was just me, right? Being codependent, being the helper, working all these hours, doing all the things, and it was messing with my body. Okay, this is what sacrificial helping looks like on the body. This is what codependence at work can look like. I will put the needs of my coworkers, clients, this job above my own, unconsciously hoping that my needs will be fulfilled. And still to this day, you guys, as I record, I'm sitting on my cushion. It's called Comfy Life, if anyone's needing it. I use it for preventative support. Since my lower back, it just, I think it had some trauma and it can't seem to forget. And sometimes it gets sensitive. So those are ways that I sacrificed my body. Sacrificed putting the needs of others and the physical toll it took on my body. Okay, next is my time. Let's just have some more tea. How are you sacrificing your time, dear listener, right now? Early on at this job, I remember my dad, right? I was living at home. He came in and he saw me typing away on my computer. I just take lots of notes and document, and there were deadlines. And he said, "Hey, Marissa, can you take the trash out?" Right? I'm living at home for free. And I sense I had weekly chores to help out. I don't sense that. I did. But I kid you not, I I started to cry, and I said to him, Dad, I'm under a lot of stress and pressure right now. Please lay off and leave me alone. Right? Like, how dare you ask me to do anything besides what I'm doing? It just goes to show how little time I had, right? I didn't have time to get up, take the trash out, put another bag in, and wash my hands. I couldn't do it. And like, that's a red flag. And yeah, I think he was just like, oh, okay. Again, like, I don't blame my parents. I just am curious how sacrificial helping can be enabled by supportive people nearby, right? How potentially can those in your life who are also maybe sacrificial helpers in their jobs just encourage you to do the same in yours? Other ways I sacrifice my time. I was in a position that I was supposed to be available 24/7. So I took calls from the teens I was working with at midnight. I literally answered drunk dials from grandmothers who were having marital disputes, right? Not exactly my client. I was working with foster and probation youth, but drunk grandmothers would reach out. And I worked late the night after Christmas, right? Trying to convince a client to stay home, please stay home, rather than go sleep in the park because they were upset with family. So the worst two examples, my then fiance's birthday. I think it was November 29th of 2017. I had an evening session with a client that ended up turning into a couples session with his grandparents. So picture me sitting on their living room couch. We worked in the home, so I went to their home, and hearing them, I was in the middle, and just hearing them go back and forth in a disagreement they were having. My phone was in my purse, so I couldn't look at it. And this reminds me of Molly's episode. For you guys who haven't listened to Molly, the Codependummy Dilemma, she was in the exact same pickle. And I sat there and I did my best to help them resolve their argument. And I also didn't want to offend them. I wanted to help. I did not want to offend them by getting up and checking my phone and leaving abruptly. The plan was for me to end with that client, let's say like at 6:30, and I was supposed to meet my fiance at 6:45 for dinner nearby. And I ended up just sitting with these grandparents, helping them resolve their argument. And I think I looked at my phone finally and saw multiple missed calls from him at like 7:30. So I'm already 45 minutes late. I drove to where we were supposed to eat. Now I'm an hour late on his birthday. And I think they were closing, so we had to eat quickly. Right? And do you guys think I had any real regard for this? I mean, I imagine I was apologetic, but since I'm a codependummy, sacrificial helper, I don't think I was attuned to him. And right, that's the thing about codependency. There's this tag, you're it, thank God, right? We cannot be codependent with everyone, or just, there were just that our mind literally would explode, implode. But also, if we are codependent with work, right? If we're myopic, if our focus is really just on who's in front of us and being codependent and focusing on their needs, then other people and relationships in our life are sacrificed too, right? Those grandparents had been having that same argument for years. They would have been fine that night if I had left early, but I'm a helper. I need to help them resolve their fight before I have permission to leave. And then that, right, my fiance pays for it. Our relationship pays for it. Okay, other way I sacrificed my time. I worked on my honeymoon. I went to Greece and I basically sandwiched the trip. So we left on Tuesday. So Monday, half day Tuesday, I was in the office working my butt off. Like literally, we were like getting on the plane and I'm sending texts and sending emails. I sent emails while I was there. And when we landed, we were there for like 2.5, 3 weeks. We landed on a Thursday. I powered up my phone and started making appointments with all my clients and their families. I worked all day that next Friday, right? Like jet lag, who, what? I'm a sacrificial helper. And I remember I even worked on Saturday because I was like, oh, I just took like this much time off. So like rationally, it makes sense for me to work on a Saturday, right? Katie talked about this quote, you wake up feeling like you are behind. I was in an environment where Katie said this, like this resonated. I had lost myself. I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I had no one I am a helper. I am doing the things I thought I should be to be a good employee, a good therapist, a good helper with these families. But I had I didn't pay attention to myself, my partner, my family, etc. Again, like this unconscious, like blindfold, codependency, sacrificial helping syndrome can put on us where like it's fucked up. It's fucked up. Like we really lose focus on what's important. Thinking that if I fulfill these people's needs, my needs are going to be fulfilled. And they're not. They are not. Okay. Last example of my sacrificial helping syndrome, ways I sacrificed my relationships. While I was at this job, I was not present. I alluded to this. So I was so preoccupied with my clients, their families, and helping that I totally missed out on my family, right? I dealt with teens who I literally, they were like, I'm looking up. They would threaten to jump off buildings. I'm just like picturing them up there, like, don't do it. They hid guns in their home. They wrote suicide notes to their moms, right? And I would sit and listen and talk to them and walk them off the metaphorical cliff. I mean, just hours on the phone with all of their resources, all of their people. I worked late, started early, so I was absent a lot from my family. And it was so consuming, and I was such a good helper, but I wasn't present with my family or my, we'll call him partner now. I remember distinctly how one night when all of my family was in town, which isn't often, I actually arrived home on the phone with work. I greeted them, proceeded to my room, and stayed on that call, right? I was not able to turn it off. Like Katie said, I was part of a system that asked me to be different than I was and do more than I could in order to be acceptable. I also recall how my fiance and I, at the beginning when I worked there, we would see each other like 4 nights a week, and then it was 3 nights a week, and then it was 2 nights a week, and then it was 1 night a week, and then, oh, you can't hang out? Cool, I'll see you this weekend because I'm busy and have all this work to do. So if we don't have to hang out, that's great. And Katie highlighted in the episode, if you start to wear yourself down, overpromise, then you are going to underdeliver. Okay, so here I am sacrificing my body, sacrificing my time, sacrificing my relationships, and I was not present with those kids. I was not present with those families, right? I am sacrificing for them. And after 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 2.5 years, I am not present with you either. I remember I got emotional with those families, not in front of them, but like really taking on their problems, right? The vicarious trauma. I remember being with one of them, right? I'd be sitting in a therapy session and my phone would be blowing up by another one. I mean, I was so available and helping so much. I was so needed, but I was being pulled in all these directions, right? Like, I'm saying like, oh yeah, I worked late and I started early. I wasn't present with my family, but do you think that after those late nights that I was magically present and alert during sessions the following day? Hell no, right? Like if I had a meeting, I'm just like, oh my God. I mean, was I coherent? Was I making sense? Right? So even the ones I was doing the most sacrificing for, who I was most codependent on, even they were not getting the best of me or their needs fulfilled. So picturing yourself, right? Who are you trying to please? Whose needs are you prioritizing so much? Who are you sacrificing and helping to an extreme? And how may that potentially be backfiring? How are they also starting to not get the best of you? Katie mentioned bitterness as a long-term consequence of being a sacrificial helper. I will admit that when my coworkers and I got together, I would joke with them after a long week, right? And I would say, because this happened a lot of the young children, teens, adolescents I was working with, they were in poor situations, suicidal, in foster care, and they would threaten to kill themselves. And we had this whole protocol in place to make sure that didn't happen. And I, after a long week, maybe a couple nights working really late, couple days starting really early, maybe already putting in close to 60 hours in 4 days, 4 to 5 days. And I would say to my colleagues, if one more kid tells me that they want to kill themselves, I'm going to reply, me too. Let's go to the hospital together. Ah ha 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 ha. Like, but I mean, I never did that, but I would, this bitter, dark humor, right? Cynical and pessimistic. I was just like, me fucking too, kid. Like, let's go. I am so burnt out. yeah, I need a break. You need a break? Let's go. Let's go take a break. Right? Like, oh. And like, but that honest, truthful, authentic, that is where I was at. And, you know, they all laughed. They all laughed in response too. Like, they're like, yeah, me too. Let's go. And I recall a supervisor had a metaphor allowing the staff to run like a farm, some type of like, you know, to demonstrate his lack of oversight. Like he's letting us run the farm. And we got in trouble as a staff. Maybe people weren't being accountable, and yeah, he's like, oh, you know, I have to supervise you better, and I gave you guys too much rain on the farm, and now I'm gonna have to, you know, have you sign in. And I remember texting a group of fellow therapists, and I said, like, I don't know why he keeps saying farm. This is more like a plantation with all the slave labor going on. And they love that too. Ha 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 ha. Right? So here we are, breaking our backs, underpaid, overserving, exhausted, burnt out, sacrificing, helping. I am making these jokes. My colleagues are responding and resonating. And right, but like those jokes should not be made. Right? What does it mean that we get to this dark humor? That we express this cynicism, pessimism through comedy? And I will admit that despite 2.5 years of doing that, driving all over, the back pain, being absent from my family, from my fiance, gaining the weight, just all the vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue and negative experiences I had. I was stalked. Actually, I remember one time I was followed home. I was in these very scary situations involving firearms. My safety was compromised. We went into very scary neighborhoods, but despite all of it, right, I stayed on. And Katie talked about, she said it was almost a badge of honor, right? Part of me, I will admit, codependummy listener, I fucking loved it. I loved it. I loved people thinking like, oh my God, like that job's so crazy, or you're helping so much. You're helping these foster and probation youth. You're such a good person. Oh, like you were working 70, 80 hours a week. Wow, Marissa, the sacrifice. I felt good. I felt like a hard worker. Like I was better than other people who weren't working in the same industry. Like Katie said it was almost a badge of honor. It was a badge of fucking honor for me. And I got off. My ego was like, yeah, I'm such a good person. Such a good person. So I am going to pause there, dear codependummy. I wonder what comes up for you, right? How are you sacrificing your time, energy, money, body, family, resources, education, calm, mental health, etc. for others? How are you being a little codependummy at work? And take time to re-listen to Katie's podcast, write them out, send me an email, talk about them in therapy, share it with a friend who is also listening to the podcast. And in part 3, Katie provided us with a lot of questions to help us reflect, bring more self-awareness. So I'm going to break all of those questions down. I'm going to model and be honest, hope it resonates. And so then you can stop being a sacrificial helper at work sooner than later. Or if you've been one, just really reflect so we don't have to repeat it, right? That's the thing too. This is just examples from one position I had, but there's, definitely was a pattern, okay, at other jobs before that. So thank you for listening. Until next time, please remember, my dear codependummy listener, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, baby girl, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. Until next time, I want you to stop playing small so you can start taking up some goddamn space. This is Marissa Escobar, your hostess mostest. I will see you in part 3, Codependency and Sacrificial Helping Syndrome, next week. Take care. You're still here? Just kidding. Girl, this is not therapy and I'm not your therapist, okay? This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the publisher, or the guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you want or need a professional, you should find one.